I still remember the look of disgust on my daughter-in-law's face when she saw me pull up to her wedding in my 1989 Toyota Corolla. "Is that really what Eleanor drove here in?" she whispered to my son, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. God, how embarrassing. The words sliced through me as I stood there in my carefully chosen dress, clutching a handcrafted wedding gift I'd spent months creating. My son Daniel just laughed nervously and guided her away, leaving me alone with my car keys still warm in my palm. Little did she know what was actually inside that old car's trunk. Something that would change everything between us. Something I never planned to reveal until that very moment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never chased luxury or status. I never prioritized appearances over substance. But I never complained, not once. Because everything I did, every extra shift at the hospital, every missed vacation, every night spent studying at my kitchen table, instead of sleeping, was for my son, Daniel. I had Daniel when I was just 22, newly graduated from nursing school, and suddenly alone when his father decided fatherhood wasn't the adventure he'd signed up for. We started our life together, in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The constant hum of machines below became the soundtrack to our early years together. Me in nursing scrubs, working night shifts while my mother watched him, then rushing home to be there when he woke up. Those first years were a beautiful kind of chaos. I'd carry him to the park between shifts, his little hands wrapped around my fingers as he learned to walk. I'd read to him from my nursing textbooks when storybooks ran out, watching his eyes grow heavy as I explained the circulatory system in hushed tones. He used to fall asleep on my chest, his breathing syncing with mine, and in those moments, exhaustion would transform into something sacred. Money was always tight, but we managed. I packed his lunch every day, sewed patches on his clothes when they tore, and saved all year for birthday presents. When he was 7, he wanted a bicycle, more than anything. I picked up weekend shifts for 3 months straight to afford it, then presented it to him with ribbon tied around the handlebars. His face lit up like summer sunrise, and he rode that bike until the tires were smooth. "When I grow up," he'd tell me, "I'm going to buy you a castle, Mom, with a swimming pool and everything." I'd laugh and tell him I didn't need a castle. I just needed him to be happy, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. When Daniel was 10, I bought the car, the 1989 Toyota Corolla that would become such a significant part of our story. It wasn't new even then, with its faded blue paint and the small crack in the passenger window that whistled on highway drives. But it was reliable. It got us to school and work and grocery stores. It carried us to weekend adventures at Free, museums and lakes where we'd skip stones until sunset. I called it Old Faithful, and Daniel loved that car almost as much as I did. He named the peculiar sound the engine made when it started, the dragon waking up. He celebrated when we crossed 100,000 miles, insisting we pull over to take a photo of the odometer. That car wasn't just transportation. It was the vessel that carried us through the chapters of his childhood. As Daniel entered his teenage years, something began to shift. He started noticing the differences between our life and his friends' lives. He became aware of brand names, of vacation destinations, of homes with more than one bathroom. I saw it happening, the subtle comparisons, the growing consciousness of what we didn't have. "Mom, Jason's family is going to Europe this summer," he'd say, or "Tyler got a new phone for his birthday." I would nod and acknowledge these things, then gently remind him of all we did have. Each other, our health, our modest but comfortable home that I'd finally been able to purchase when he was 12. For the most part, he accepted this. He was a good kid, thoughtful, bright, determined. He excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and science. By his junior year, it became clear that he had real potential for a career in engineering or finance. His guidance counselor called me in for a meeting. Daniel could attend an excellent university with scholarships, she told me. But he'll need some additional preparation, summer programs, advanced courses, the right extracurriculars. I nodded, not letting my face reveal the immediate calculations running through my head. The cost of these programs, the time he wouldn't be able to work summer jobs to save for college, the application fees. Whatever he needs, I said. We'll make it happen. And we did. I took on a second nursing position at a private clinic. I sold handmade quilts at local craft fairs, a skill my grandmother had taught me. I refinanced our small house. Every extra dollar went into what I called Daniel's future fund. Not once did I tell him how much I was working or what it cost. In my mind, that wasn't his burden to carry. Daniel thrived. He joined robotics clubs, attended science camps, stayed up late perfecting his college essays. When the acceptance letters came, including one from Westridge University with a substantial merit scholarship, we stood in the kitchen, hugging and crying, him from joy, me from a complex mixture of pride, relief, and the quiet knowledge that our daily lives were about to change forever. The day I drove him to college was bright and crisp, the kind of autumn day that feels like it's showing off. We packed Old Faithful to the brim, barely able to see out the back window. The car protested slightly under the weight, but as always, it carried us faithfully to our destination. His dormitory was beautiful, all brick and ivy and large windows. As we unloaded his belongings, I noticed other parents arriving in sleek SUVs and luxury sedans. I saw Daniel notice too. For the first time, I felt a flicker of self-consciousness about our car, quickly pushed aside as we focused on settling him into his new room. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When it was time for me to leave, we stood awkwardly in the parking lot. 18 years of shared life suddenly condensed into a goodbye that neither of us knew how to navigate. I hugged him tightly, breathing in the scent of his hair, trying to memorize the feeling of holding my child before he became something else entirely. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he said, his voice deeper. Then I remembered it being just yesterday. "Drive safe, okay? Call me when you get home." I nodded, not trusting my voice. As I pulled away, I watched him in the rearview mirror, standing tall among the red brick buildings, waving until I turned the corner and he disappeared from view. I cried the entire drive home, then walked through our suddenly silent house, touching his abandoned belongings like artifacts from a civilization I once knew intimately. Those college years brought gradual changes in Daniel. Each time he came home for breaks, he seemed to have adopted new vocabulary, new opinions, new tastes. He talked about economic theories and investment strategies. He complained about the slow internet at our house. He mentioned classmates whose parents worked on Wall Street or ran tech companies. I listened with interest, delighting in his expanding mind, even as I sensed him outgrowing not just our home, but perhaps our relationship as we'd known it. This was natural, I told myself. This was the point of all those sacrifices. For him to have horizons beyond what I could have imagined at his age. During his junior year, Daniel called with exciting news. He'd secured a prestigious summer internship at Landmark Financial in Chicago. "It's super competitive, Mom," he explained. "This could set up my entire career." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely thrilled for him. "Where will you live?" "Well, that's the thing," he hesitated. "The stipend isn't great. I might need a little help with housing." I didn't hesitate. "Of course. We'll figure it out." I took out a small personal loan on top of the second job I was still working to help cover his expenses in Chicago. When he offered to pay me back after graduation, I waved it away. "Just be happy," I told him. "That's all the repayment I need." The internship led to a job offer upon graduation. Daniel moved permanently to Chicago, starting as an analyst with a salary that seemed astronomical to me. We spoke less frequently as he established his new life. When we did talk, his stories were filled with client meetings, networking events, and colleagues who had become friends. It was during one of these calls, about a year after he started working, that he mentioned a woman named Alessandra. "She's incredible, Mom," he said, his voice animated in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. "She graduated from Wharton. Her father runs this huge development company in Boston. You'd like her." In the months that followed, Alessandra became a regular feature in our conversations. I learned she spoke 3 languages, had traveled to over 30 countries, and worked in the marketing department of a luxury brand company. Daniel sounded happy, and that was all that mattered to me. 6 months later, he called on a Sunday evening, his voice trembling with excitement. "We're engaged, Mom. I asked Alessandra to marry me, and she said yes." Joy rushed through me. "Oh, Daniel, congratulations! I'm so happy for you both." "Thanks," he said. "We're thinking about a spring wedding. Nothing too big, just close family and friends, around 200 people." I blinked at the number, which didn't align with my definition of not too big, but I kept my voice enthusiastic. "Wonderful. I can't wait to meet her." "You'll love her," he assured me. "Everyone does." Meeting Alessandra happened over Thanksgiving, when Daniel brought her to visit. She was undeniably beautiful, tall and elegant, with glossy dark hair and impeccable clothes. She greeted me with a perfect smile and a light hug that barely made contact. "It's so quaint here," she said, looking around my home, the home where I'd raised her fiancé, where every piece of furniture had a story, where bookshelves overflowed with photos documenting Daniel's journey from infant to man. Very cozy. Throughout the visit, I tried to connect with her. I asked about her family, her work, her interests. Her answers were polite but brief, often redirecting the conversation back to her and Daniel's life in Chicago or their plans for the future. When I brought out photo albums from Daniel's childhood, she glanced at them with detached amusement, as if they were artifacts from a mildly interesting museum exhibit. At dinner, I served my grandmother's lasagna recipe, Daniel's favorite since childhood. Alessandra took a small portion, moved it around her plate, and eventually excused herself to answer a work emergency on her phone. Later, I overheard her in the guest room, laughing about the carb overload to someone on the phone. The most revealing moment came when Daniel gave her a tour of the backyard, showing her the treehouse he and I had built together one summer. I watched from the kitchen window as she nodded without really looking at it, then checked her watch. Daniel pointed to various features, his gestures animated, clearly sharing memories that mattered to him. She smiled vaguely, then pulled out her phone and took a selfie with the treehouse in the background. When they returned inside, I heard her say, "Your mom really kept everything exactly the same, didn't she? It's like a time capsule." Daniel laughed uncomfortably. "Yeah, I guess she did." Something cold settled in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. What mattered was Daniel's happiness, not whether his fiancée appreciated the life we'd built together, or the memories I cherished. The wedding planning accelerated after the holidays. I offered to help, but Alessandra politely declined, explaining that her mother and their wedding planner had everything under control. "We're going for a very specific aesthetic," she told me during one of their brief visits. "Modern, elegant, understated luxury." I nodded, not entirely sure what that meant, but determined to be supportive. When Daniel asked if I would contribute to the wedding costs, I immediately agreed, though the amount they requested would require me to dip into my modest retirement savings. "Of course," I said. "It's your special day." As the wedding approached, I received increasingly detailed instructions: what to wear, a specific shade of navy blue, when to arrive, where to sit. I absorbed these directives without complaint, focused only on the fact that my son was getting married. The week before the wedding, Daniel called with what he framed as a delicate question. "Mom, about the wedding. How were you planning? To get there?" "I'll drive, of course," I replied, confused by the question. A pause. "In your car? The Toyota?" "Yes," I said slowly. "Is there a problem?" "No, no problem," he said quickly. "It's just, Alessandra's family is, they're pretty image conscious. There will be valet parking and he trailed off, but the implication was clear. My car, faithful companion through Daniel's entire life, witness to countless milestones, carrier of so many memories, was an embarrassment. "Would you like me to rent something else?" I asked quietly. "No, don't go to the expense," he said, sounding relieved. "Maybe you could just park further away? Or get a ride from someone? I could send a car service." "I'll figure something out," I said, feeling a heaviness settle over me. After we hung up, I sat on my porch swing, stroking the worn key to Old Faithful that hung on my keychain. For the first time in our relationship, I felt something unfamiliar when thinking about my son. A whisper of disappointment. Still, I told myself this was a minor issue. Wedding stress affected everyone. Daniel was navigating two families, two worlds coming together. I would not add to his burden. The wedding was scheduled for an exclusive resort outside Chicago, a sprawling property with manicured gardens and a view of Lake Michigan. I arrived the day before for the rehearsal dinner, having driven the full 8 hours in Old Faithful. I parked far from the entrance as subtly suggested, then checked into my room to prepare for the evening's event. The rehearsal dinner was held in a glass-walled pavilion overlooking the water. Alessandra's family dominated the space. Her father, tall and commanding, her mother elegant and watchful, her 3 brothers loud and confident. They greeted me politely when Daniel introduced us, but their eyes moved past me quickly, scanning for more important connections. I wore a simple but nice dress I'd purchased for the occasion, my only jewelry a pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother. Next to Alessandra's family in their designer clothes and gleaming accessories, I felt plain and out of place. But I smiled warmly, determined to focus on Daniel's happiness. As the evening progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated. Daniel was busy with his soon-to-be in-laws and their connections. When I approached groups, conversations would politely pause, then resume on topics that excluded me. Mutual friends I didn't know, experiences I hadn't shared, references to wealth I couldn't relate to. Eventually, I found myself alone at a table near the back, watching my son move through the room with a confidence that both filled me with pride and somehow heightened my sense of distance from him. He looked so at home in this world, a world I had sacrificed everything to help him reach, but one where I clearly didn't belong. As I was considering whether I could slip away without being noticed, an older woman sat down beside me. She introduced herself as Barbara, Alessandra's grandmother. "You're Daniel's mother," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I smiled. "Eleanor." She nodded, studying me with sharp eyes that reminded me of birds of prey. "Raised him by yourself, I understand." "I did." "He's very accomplished. You must have done something right." The compliment, though gruffly delivered, warmed me. I tried my best. Barbara snorted softly. Better than most with twice the resources. She glanced around the room, her expression unimpressed. All this showing off. In my day, weddings were about the marriage, not the spectacle. I found myself warming to this direct, unimpressed woman. We talked for nearly an hour, about raising children, about nursing, she had been a hospital administrator, about the changing world. She didn't speak down to me or gloss over topics. For the first time that evening, I felt seen. As the night wound down, Barbara patted my hand. "Come sit with me tomorrow at the ceremony. These fancy seating charts are nonsense." I thanked her, genuinely grateful for the connection. As I left the pavilion, I caught Daniel's eye across the room. He gave me a quick, distracted smile before turning back to his conversation. I lifted my hand in a small wave he didn't see, then slipped out into the cool night air. Back in my room, I laid out my dress for the wedding. A full-length gown in the navy blue that had been specified, purchased from a department store sale rack, but elegant enough for the occasion. Beside it, I placed the gift I had created for Daniel and Alessandra. A handmade quilt featuring fabrics from significant moments in Daniel's life. A square from his baby blanket, a piece of his high school graduation gown, fabric from the curtains in his childhood bedroom, and dozens of other carefully preserved memories sewn together with love. I had worked on it secretly for months, pricking my fingers countless times, staying up late after long nursing shifts to complete just one more square. It wasn't expensive, but it was irreplaceable, a tangible record of a life we had shared, a gift that only I could give. As I drifted to sleep that night, I felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in the man my son had become, love that had never wavered, and an uneasiness I couldn't quite name, a sense that something important was shifting beneath my feet. The wedding day dawned bright and clear. I woke early, had coffee on my room's small balcony, and prepared myself for the day ahead. I styled my hair, applied makeup with special care, and put on the navy dress that I hoped would help me blend appropriately into the expensive backdrop of my son's wedding. Before leaving my room, I took the carefully wrapped quilt and placed it in my car trunk. The wedding coordinator had informed me that gifts should be delivered to a specific room for later display, but something told me to wait, to give this gift more personally. I wanted to see Daniel's face when he opened it, to explain the significance of each fabric square, to pass on not just the object, but the memories it contained. With 3 hours until the ceremony, I decided to take a walk around the resort grounds to calm my nerves. The property was stunning: flowering gardens, stone pathways, glimpses of the lake between carefully positioned trees. I found a bench overlooking the water and sat for a while, thinking about the day Daniel was born, the overwhelming love I'd felt, the promise I'd made to give him the best life I possibly could. I kept that promise, I whispered to myself, watching a sailboat drift across the horizon. Nothing too big, just close family and friends, around 200 people. I blinked at the number, which didn't align with my definition of not too big, but I kept my voice enthusiastic. Wonderful. I can't wait to meet her. You'll love her, he assured me. Everyone does. Meeting Alessandra happened over Thanksgiving, when Daniel brought her to visit. She was undeniably beautiful, tall and elegant, with glossy dark hair and impeccable clothes. She greeted me with a perfect smile and a light hug that barely made contact. "It's so quaint here," she said, looking around my home, the home where I'd raised her fiancé, where every piece of furniture had a story, where bookshelves overflowed with photos documenting Daniel's journey from infant to man. Very cozy. Throughout the visit, I tried to connect with her. I asked about her family, her work, her interests. Her answers were polite but brief, often redirecting the conversation back to her and Daniel's life in Chicago or their plans for the future. When I brought out photo albums from Daniel's childhood, she glanced at them with detached amusement, as if they were artifacts from a mildly interesting museum exhibit. At dinner, I served my grandmother's lasagna recipe, Daniel's favorite, since childhood. Alessandra took a small portion, moved it around her plate, and eventually excused herself to answer a work emergency on her phone. Later, I overheard her in the guest room, laughing about the carb overload to someone on the phone. The most revealing moment came when Daniel gave her a tour of the backyard, showing her the treehouse he and I had built together one summer. I watched from the kitchen window as she nodded without really looking at it, then checked her watch. Daniel pointed to various features, his gestures animated, clearly sharing memories that mattered to him. She smiled vaguely, then pulled out her phone and took a selfie with the treehouse in the background. When they returned inside, I heard her say, "Your mom really kept everything exactly the same, didn't she? It's like a time capsule." Daniel laughed uncomfortably. "Yeah, I guess she did." Something cold settled in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. What mattered was Daniel's happiness, not whether his fiancée appreciated the life we'd built together or the memories I cherished. The wedding planning accelerated after the holidays. I offered to help, but Alessandra politely declined, explaining that her mother and their wedding planner had everything under control. "We're going for a very specific aesthetic," she told me during one of their brief visits. "Modern, elegant, understated luxury." I nodded, not entirely sure what that meant, but determined to be supportive. When Daniel asked if I would contribute to the wedding costs, I immediately agreed, though the amount they requested would require me to dip into my modest retirement savings. "Of course," I said, "it's your special day." As the wedding approached, I received increasingly detailed instructions: what to wear, a specific shade of navy blue, when to arrive, where to sit. I absorbed these directives without complaint, focused only on the fact that my son was getting married. The week before the wedding, Daniel called with what he framed as a delicate question. "Mom, about the wedding. How were you planning? To get there?" "I'll drive, of course," I replied, confused by the question. A pause. "In your car? The Toyota?" "Yes," I said slowly. "Is there a problem?" "No, no problem," he said quickly. "It's just, Alessandra's family is, they're pretty image conscious. There will be valet parking and—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. My car, faithful companion through Daniel's entire life, witness to countless milestones, carrier of so many memories, was an embarrassment. "Would you like me to rent something else?" I asked quietly. "No, don't go to the expense," he said, sounding relieved. "Maybe you could just park further away, or get a ride from someone. I could send a car service." "I'll figure something out," I said, feeling a heaviness settle over me. After we hung up, I sat on my porch swing, stroking the worn key to Old Faithful that hung on my keychain. For the first time in our relationship, I felt something unfamiliar when thinking about my son. A whisper of disappointment. Still, I told myself this was a minor issue. Wedding stress affected everyone. Daniel was navigating two families, two worlds coming together. I would not add to his burden. The wedding was scheduled for an exclusive resort outside Chicago, a sprawling property with manicured gardens and a view of Lake Michigan. I arrived the day before for the rehearsal dinner, having driven the full 8 hours in Old Faithful. I parked far from the entrance as subtly suggested, then checked into my room to prepare for the evening's event. The rehearsal dinner was held in a glass-walled pavilion overlooking the water. Alessandra's family dominated the space. Her father tall and commanding, her mother elegant and watchful, her 3 brothers loud and confident. They greeted me politely when Daniel introduced us, but their eyes moved past me quickly, scanning for more important connections. I wore a simple but nice dress I'd purchased for the occasion. My only jewelry, a pearl necklace that had belonged to my mother. Next to Alessandra's family in their designer clothes and gleaming accessories, I felt plain and out of place. But I smiled warmly, determined to focus on Daniel's happiness. As the evening progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated. Daniel was busy with his soon-to-be in-laws and their connections. When I approached groups, conversations would politely pause, then resume on topics that excluded me. Mutual friends I didn't know, experiences I hadn't shared, references to wealth I couldn't relate to. Eventually, I found myself alone at a table near the back, watching my son move through the room with a confidence that both filled me with pride and somehow heightened my sense of distance from him. He looked so at home in this world, a world I had sacrificed everything to help him reach, but one where I clearly didn't belong. As I was considering whether I could slip away without being noticed, An older woman sat down beside me. She introduced herself as Barbara, Alessandra's grandmother. "You're Daniel's mother," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I smiled. "Eleanor." She nodded, studying me with sharp eyes that reminded me of birds of prey. "Raised him by yourself, I understand." I did. "He's very accomplished. You must have done something right." The compliment, though gruffly delivered, warmed me. I tried my best. Barbara snorted softly. "Better than most with twice the resources." She glanced around the room, her expression unimpressed. "All this showing off. In my day, weddings were about the marriage, not the spectacle." I found myself warming to this direct, unimpressed woman. We talked for nearly an hour, about raising children, about nursing. She had been a hospital administrator, about the changing world. She didn't speak down to me or gloss over topics. For the first time that evening, I felt seen. As the night wound down, Barbara patted my hand. "Come sit with me tomorrow at the ceremony. These fancy seating charts are nonsense." I thanked her, genuinely grateful for the connection. As I left the pavilion, I caught Daniel's eye across the room. He gave me a quick, distracted smile before turning back to his conversation. I lifted my hand in a small wave he didn't see, then slipped out into the cool night air. Back in my room, I laid out my dress for the wedding, a full-length gown in the navy blue that had been specified, purchased from a department store sale rack but elegant enough for the occasion. Beside it, I placed the gift I had created for Daniel and Alessandra, a handmade quilt featuring fabrics from significant moments in Daniel's life. A square from his baby blanket, a piece of his high school graduation gown, fabric from the curtains in his childhood bedroom, and dozens of other carefully preserved memories sewn together with love. I had worked on it secretly for months, pricking my fingers countless times, staying up late after long nursing shifts to complete just one more square. It wasn't expensive, but it was irreplaceable. A tangible record of a life we had shared, a gift that only I could give. As I drifted to sleep that night, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in the man my son had become, love that had never wavered, and an uneasiness I couldn't quite name, a sense that something important was shifting beneath my feet. The wedding day dawned bright and clear. I woke early, had coffee on my room's small balcony, and prepared myself for the day ahead. I styled my hair, applied makeup with special care, and put on the navy dress that I hoped would help me blend appropriately into the expensive backdrop of my son's wedding. Before leaving my room, I took the carefully wrapped quilt and placed it in my car trunk. The wedding coordinator had informed me that gifts should be delivered to a specific room for later display. But something told me to wait, to give this gift more personally. I wanted to see Daniel's face when he opened it, to explain the significance of each fabric square, to pass on not just the object, but the memories it contained. With 3 hours until the ceremony, I decided to take a walk around the resort, grounds to calm my nerves. The property was stunning, flowering gardens, stone pathways, glimpses of the lake between carefully positioned trees. I found a bench overlooking the water and sat for a while, thinking about the day Daniel was born, the overwhelming love I'd felt, the promise I'd made to give him the best life I possibly could. I kept that promise, I whispered to myself, watching a sailboat drift across the horizon. I'll vouch for this. It's a tradition from the groom's family. The coordinator looked between us, clearly torn, then nodded reluctantly. Very well. Where would you like it placed? On a small table near the altar, I said. I'll help set it up. With Barbara's authoritative presence smoothing the way, I was allowed to place the still-wrapped quilt on a small table that had been intended for the unity candle. The coordinator looked nervous, but didn't interfere. What exactly are you planning? Barbara asked quietly as we arranged the package. Just a reminder, I replied, of who we are. All of us. She studied me, then nodded approvingly. Good for you. I took my assigned seat in the back row, feeling strangely calm. Around me, guests chatted and greeted each other, occasionally glancing curiously at the mysterious package now positioned prominently near where the couple would stand. I noticed Alessandra's mother looking at it with confusion, then whispering urgently to her husband, who shrugged. The music began, signaling the start of the ceremony. The wedding party processed in pairs, Alessandra's brothers escorting bridesmaids, followed by smaller children carrying flowers. Then Daniel appeared, handsome in his tuxedo, walking confidently to his position at the altar. His eyes scanned the gathering briefly, perhaps looking for me, before settling into his place. When he noticed the package on the table, a flicker of confusion crossed his face. He glanced questioningly at the officiant, who looked equally perplexed. Then the music changed, and everyone stood as Alessandra appeared, stunning in her designer gown, arm linked with her father's. She processed, slowly down the aisle, her smile radiant until she, too, noticed the unexpected addition near the altar. A momentary frown marred her perfect expression before she smoothed it away. The ceremony began traditionally: welcome, readings, expressions of intent. When the officiant reached the exchange of vows, he paused, consulting his notes with apparent confusion. "I understand there is a family tradition to be honored at this time," he said, looking uncertainly at Daniel. Daniel's expression was blank. "I'm not sure what you mean." From my seat in the back row, I stood. "If I may," I said, my voice clear and steady. A ripple of whispers moved through the guests. Alessandra's eyes widened, then narrowed. Daniel looked stunned, his gaze darting between me and his bride. I walked forward, conscious of every eye upon me, until I reached the small table. "Daniel," I said, looking directly at my son, "when you were born, I made you a promise. Do you remember what it was?" He stared at me, speechless, clearly caught between confusion and mortification. "I promised to give you the best life I possibly could," I continued, my voice unwavering. "To help you grow into a man who knew both strength and kindness. A man who recognized the value of where he came from, even as he built his future." I began unwrapping the quilt, revealing its intricate patchwork of memories. "This quilt contains pieces of your life, our life together. The blue square in the corner is from your first baby blanket. The red plaid is from the shirt you wore on your first day of school. This gray piece is from the suit you wore to your high school graduation." As I unfolded it fully, guests murmured in appreciation of its craftsmanship. It was genuinely beautiful, not in a sleek, expensive way, but in the authentic manner of something created with profound love and attention. "Each piece tells part of your story," I said, looking at Daniel, whose face had gone through a range of emotions: embarrassment, confusion, and now something more complex. A story that didn't begin with Brooks Brothers suits or corporate boardrooms or engagement parties at country clubs. I turned to include Alessandra in my gaze. It began with midnight feedings and secondhand clothes and a mother who worked double shifts to make sure her son could dream beyond her own horizons. I lifted the quilt slightly. "This isn't expensive or impressive by the standards of many people here, but it's authentic. It's true. And it's part of who you are, Daniel, whether you choose to remember that or not." The silence in the ceremonial space was absolute. Alessandra stood rigid, her perfect features frozen in a mask of polite horror. Her parents looked stunned. Daniel stared at the quilt, then at me, his expression unreadable. "I brought this today not to embarrass you," I continued gently, "but to honor you. To honor who we were together and the journey that brought you to this moment. Because you can't truly share your future with someone if you're ashamed of your past." I carefully refolded the quilt and placed it back on the table. "This is my gift to you both. Not just the quilt, but the truth it represents. What you do with it is your choice." I stepped back, preparing to return to my seat, when Daniel's voice stopped me. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Wait." He moved toward me, his steps uncertain at first, then more determined. When he reached me, he looked down at the quilt, then touched it gently, his fingers tracing the patterns. "The red flannel," he said quietly. "That was my favorite shirt. I wore it until the elbows had holes." I nodded, throat tight. "And this," he continued, pointing to a square of faded denim, "from my first pair of jeans with my own money from mowing lawns." "You were so proud," I whispered. He looked up, at me, his eyes shining with tears. I was proud of everything we built together. For a moment, we stood there, mother and son, the artificial distance of recent years collapsing under the weight of shared memory. Then Daniel turned to Alessandra, still frozen at the altar. "Alessandra," he said, his voice stronger now, "this is my mother. Not just the woman who raised me, but the woman who showed me what it means to work without complaint, to love without condition, to build something from nothing but determination." Alessandra's perfect composure wavered. She glanced around, at the assembled guests, clearly unsure how to respond to this unscripted moment. "Maybe this isn't the time," she began. "It's exactly the time," Daniel interrupted, surprising both of us. "Before we make vows about our future, you need to understand my past, all of it." He picked up the quilt. "This car you mocked? It carried me to my first day of school, to college move-in day, to the hospital when I broke my arm at 12. It was reliable when nothing else was." Whispers rippled through the guests again. Alessandra's face flushed. "You talked about my car?" I asked quietly. Daniel looked at me, genuine remorse in his eyes. "I heard what you both said earlier, about the car, about where to seat you, about sending you home early." He turned back to Alessandra. "I've been trying so hard to fit into your world that I've been denying my own, pretending to be embarrassed by the very things and people that made me who I am." Alessandra's expression hardened. "Daniel, you're causing a scene," she hissed. "We can discuss this later." "No," he said firmly. "If we're going to build a life together, it starts with honesty, about who I am, where I come from, and the people who matter to me." He walked to the edge of the platform and addressed the gathered guests. "I owe all of you an apology, especially my mother. I've been presenting a version of myself that isn't entirely real, a man ashamed of his modest beginnings, eager to erase the very foundation his life was built upon." Alessandra's father stepped forward. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess," he suggested, clearly attempting to regain control of the situation. But Daniel shook his head. "No. This needs to be said." He turned to me. "Mom, I'm sorry. I've been allowing people to diminish you, to diminish us, because I thought that's what it took to belong in this new world. I was wrong." Tears filled my eyes, but I stood tall, refusing to be overcome by emotion in this moment. Daniel continued. "The truth is, everything I am began with a single mother who worked her fingers raw to give me opportunities she never had. Who taught me that character matters more than possessions. Who loved me enough to let me go, even when it broke her heart." He turned back to Alessandra, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "If we're going to marry, you need to accept all of me, including my mother, my history, and yes, even her car. Because they're not separate from who I am. They are who I am." A heavy silence fell over the gathering. Alessandra stared at Daniel, then at me, then at the quilt still in his hands. Something in her perfect poise cracked slightly, revealing a flash of genuine emotion beneath. Whether anger or understanding, I couldn't tell. "Daniel?" she said finally, her voice low but carrying in the silence. "You're right." It was perhaps the last response any of us expected. She took a shaky breath. "I have been unkind, dismissive." She looked at me directly for perhaps the first time. "Mrs. Hayes, I apologize. My behavior has been inexcusable." The sincerity in her voice surprised me. I nodded, acknowledging her words without quite accepting them yet. Alessandra turned back to Daniel. "But you need to understand, this isn't just about me being snobby. It's about the world we live in, the expectations, the constant awareness of how others perceive." "No," Daniel said quietly. "It's exactly about being snobby. About valuing appearance over substance. About forgetting what actually matters." Her eyes flashed with a mixture of hurt and recognition. For a tense moment, they stared at each other, the future of their relationship hanging in the balance. Then Barbara, still sitting in the front row, spoke up. "For heaven's sake, both of you come down from there and take a breath. Weddings can wait. Honesty can't." Something about her matter-of-fact tone broke the tension. Daniel let out a short laugh, then extended his hand to Alessandra. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, and they stepped down from the altar platform together. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant announced, clearly relieved to have a script again. "The ceremony will be delayed briefly. Please enjoy refreshments on the terrace." As confused guests began making their way outside, I stood still, uncertain what to do next. Daniel approached me, Alessandra beside him. "Mom," he said softly, "there's something else in the trunk of your car, isn't there? Something more than this quilt." I looked at him in surprise. "How did you know?" A small smile touched his lips. "Because I remember how you taught me that the most valuable things aren't always the most visible." He squeezed Alessandra's hand. "We'd like to see it. All of it. If you're willing to show us." I studied them both. My son returned to himself somehow in the midst of this chaos. And his fiancée, her perfect facade cracked to reveal something more complicated beneath. Something that might, possibly, be capable of growth. "All right," I said. "Let's go to the car." We walked together across the manicured lawn, an unlikely trio in formal wear, followed at a distance by curious family members. Old Faithful sat where I'd left it, somehow dignified despite its faded paint and visible age. I opened the trunk and moved aside the box of photos to reveal what lay beneath, a small, worn leather portfolio. "This," I said, lifting it out, "is what I really wanted to show you today." Daniel looked confused. "Your nursing credentials?" I shook my head and opened the portfolio. Inside were documents, property deeds, investment statements, bank records, arranged neatly alongside photographs of buildings and land. "What is all this?" Alessandra asked, her curiosity seemingly genuine. "This," I said, "is what happens when you work steadily for 30 years, live frugally, and invest carefully." I pointed to the property documents. 3 rental properties in growing neighborhoods, minority ownership in a medical office building, land outside the city that's now being developed for sustainable housing. Daniel stared at the documents, then at me. "Mom, are you saying you're financially secure?" "Yes," I smiled at their shocked expressions. "Not wealthy by your standards, perhaps, but comfortable, stable, independent." Alessandra's father had approached and was looking over our shoulders. "These are impressive returns," he said, his voice colored with reluctant respect. "You've built a solid portfolio." "I never wanted wealth for its own sake," I explained. "Just security, freedom, the ability to help others when needed." I looked directly at Daniel. "Including paying for your education beyond what your scholarships covered." Daniel's face registered shock. "I thought those were student loans." "You told me they were loans." "I wanted you to focus on your studies. not worry about me, I said simply. And later, when you offered to pay me back, I didn't need it. So I invested it for you instead. I handed him another document, a trust in his name, accumulated over years of steady growth. This was going to be my wedding gift, I said softly. Not because money matters most, but because it represents something bigger. The belief I've always had in you, and the future I know you'll build. Daniel stared at the document, then at me, his eyes filled with tears. All this time, he whispered, I thought I was the success story, the one who made it. You are a success, I assured him, just not the only one, and not for the reasons you've been telling yourself. Alessandra was looking through the portfolio with new interest. Mrs. Hayes, she said, her voice different now, less polished, more genuine. I've been incredibly wrong about you. About so many things. Call me Eleanor, I said, and we've all been wrong about things. The question is what we do once we know better. Daniel put his arm around me, a gesture so familiar from his childhood yet so foreign in recent years. I know what I want to do, he said. I want to start over, right now. He looked at Alessandra. If you're willing. She studied him, then me, then nodded slowly. I think that would be good. Barbara appeared beside us, looking satisfied. Well, you've certainly given everyone something to talk about. She patted my arm. I like your style, Eleanor. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. I wasn't trying to make a statement. The best statements are the ones we make by simply being ourselves, she replied wisely. Now, what's the plan? We have 200 people eating canapés and wondering if there's going to be a wedding. Daniel looked at Alessandra. It's your call. We can postpone, regroup, figure out what we really want. She shook her head. No, I want to get married today, but differently. She turned to me. With your quilt displayed properly. With you seated where a mother of the groom should be. She glanced at Old Faithful. With honesty about who we are and who we want to become. Daniel's face broke into a genuine smile, not the polished version I'd grown accustomed to, but the real one, the one that reminded me of the little boy who once waited for me by the window. Are you sure? She nodded. I'm sure that I love you, the real you, not the version you thought I wanted. She hesitated, then added, and I'm sure that I have a lot to learn about what actually matters. I watched them, these beautiful young people at the beginning of their journey together, suddenly facing each other with new honesty. Whatever happened next, whether they married today or not, whether their relationship endured or transformed, something authentic had broken through. The careful facades, something real. Well, said Barbara briskly, if we're having a wedding, we should get back. And Eleanor, she added, linking her arm through mine. You're sitting with me. Front row. As we walked back toward the ceremony site, Daniel carrying the quilt and Alessandra deep in conversation with the wedding coordinator about changes to the program, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. Not because all hurts were healed, they weren't. But because for perhaps the first time since Daniel left for college, I was fully present as myself, not just as his mother, not as an inconvenience to be managed, but as Eleanor Hayes, a woman who had built a life of meaning and value, a woman who had raised a son capable of finding his way back to truth, even when it was difficult, a woman who knew that the contents of a car trunk, both the handmade quilt and the financial portfolio, reflected the same fundamental truth, that love manifests in multiple forms, but always in accordance with one's deepest values. As we approached the ceremony site, now being hurriedly rearranged according to new instructions, Daniel fell into step beside me. Mom, he said quietly, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I was giving up on myself. I squeezed his. Hand. That's the thing about real love, I told him. It doesn't require perfection, it just requires honesty, and the courage to begin again when necessary. He nodded, understanding at last. The ceremony resumed 30 minutes later, transformed, in ways both subtle and profound. Guests returned to find the seating rearranged. No more hierarchical divisions between sides, just a unified gathering with Barbara and I in the front row. The quilt was displayed prominently on an elegant stand near the altar, its handcrafted beauty somehow complementing rather than clashing with the expensive floral arrangements. When Daniel and Alessandra re-entered, something had shifted in their demeanor. The practiced perfection had given way to something more authentic. Daniel looked both nervous and genuinely happy, stopping to kiss my cheek before taking his place at the altar. Alessandra followed moments later, walking alone this time, a decision she had made spontaneously, explaining to her bewildered father that she wanted to begin this marriage as her own person, not as someone being handed from one man to another. The officiant, who had been hurriedly briefed on the changes, welcomed everyone with refreshing candor. As you may have noticed, we've had a slight adjustment to our proceedings, he said, drawing gentle laughter from the guests. What began as a traditional ceremony has evolved into something more meaningful, a celebration not just of two people joining together, but of the authentic histories and values they bring to this union. He gestured to the quilt. This family heirloom represents the groom's journey and the foundation of love that shaped him. Today, we honor both where these young people came from and where they are going, together. The vows, hastily rewritten, but spoken with genuine emotion, touched on themes of honesty, acceptance, and the courage to grow. When Daniel promised to honor not just who we wish to be, but who we truly are, his voice broke slightly, and I saw Alessandra squeeze his hands. In response, after the rings were exchanged and the pronouncement made, the newlyweds walked back down the aisle together. As they passed my seat, Daniel paused unexpectedly and embraced me. "I love you, Mom," he whispered. "The real me loves the real you." Those simple words healed something deep within me, a wound I hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment. I hugged him back, then watched as he and Alessandra continued on, stopping briefly to include Barbara in their celebration before exiting to prepare for the reception. The cocktail hour became a more relaxed affair than originally planned. Instead of the carefully orchestrated mingling that Alessandra had envisioned, guests formed natural conversations, many approaching me with newfound interest. "That quilt is extraordinary," said one of Alessandra's aunts. "How long did it take you to make it?" "Nearly a year," I replied. "A little each night after work." She looked impressed. "And you're a nurse, I understand." "For over 30 years now. Currently, I oversee a community health program for underserved populations." Our conversation flowed naturally from there, about healthcare challenges, about the satisfaction of meaningful work, about the balance of career and family. It was the kind of genuine exchange I had feared would be impossible in this setting. Yet here it was, happening effortlessly now that pretense had been set aside. Other guests approached with similar curiosity. Word had apparently spread about my financial portfolio as well, leading to some amusingly transparent attempts to gauge exactly how comfortable I might be. I answered these inquiries with good humor, but maintained a certain privacy around specifics. The details of my situation were less important than the principles behind it: steady work, careful planning, and values that prioritized security over display. Barbara remained by my side for much of the hour, her dry commentary providing both insight and entertainment. "Look at them all," she murmured as Alessandra's father's business associates circled nearby, recalibrating the entire family in their minds now that they know you're not just some quaint working-class mother. "Does it matter?" I asked. "To them? Enormously." She sipped her champagne. To you and me? Not in the slightest. When it was time to move to the reception, I was surprised to find myself being escorted by Charles, Alessandra's father. He had been coolly polite during our few previous interactions, but now seemed determined to establish a different tenor. "I owe you an apology, Eleanor," he said as we walked. "I allowed certain assumptions to go unchallenged." "You don't know me," I replied simply. "It's natural to form impressions based on limited information." "Perhaps. But it's a poor businessman who makes decisions without adequate data." He glanced at me. "I understand you own a stake in the Westridge Medical Complex?" I nodded, amused by his transparent attempt to establish common ground through property ownership. "A small percentage. It was my first significant investment, about 15 years ago." "Smart move. Medical real estate has excellent stability." "It wasn't just about the returns," I explained. "I wanted to help create a space where healthcare could be delivered with dignity. The complex includes a sliding-scale clinic that serves patients regardless of insurance status." He looked surprised, then thoughtful. "You know, we have a family foundation that funds healthcare initiatives. Perhaps there's room for collaboration." The offer was unexpected but seemed genuine. "I'd be interested in discussing that," I replied, realizing that bridges were being built in ways I couldn't have anticipated hours earlier. The reception hall had been transformed as well, still elegant, but with subtle adjustments that reflected the ceremony's evolution. The quilt now hung behind the head table, its intricate patterns illuminated by soft lighting. Photo displays had been hastily assembled, including some from the box I'd brought in my car. Images of Daniel throughout his childhood, captured in ordinary moments that now seemed extraordinary in their authenticity. When Daniel and Alessandra made their entrance, the room erupted in applause. They looked radiant, more naturally joyful than I had seen them before. They moved through the space greeting guests, their interaction now free of the self-conscious performances I had witnessed earlier. When they reached my table, Alessandra surprised me by embracing me warmly. "The planner wants to know if you'd like to make a toast," she said. "It wasn't in the original program, but we both feel it would be meaningful." The invitation caught me off guard. Public speaking had never been my strong suit, and the thought of addressing this sophisticated gathering was intimidating. But I nodded, understanding the significance of the gesture. I'd be honored. As dinner progressed, I jotted down a few thoughts on a napkin, wanting to speak from the heart, but aware of the importance of the moment. When the time came, the MC called my name, and I rose, glass in hand, suddenly conscious of 200 pairs of eyes turned in my direction. "For those who don't know me," I began, "I'm Eleanor Hayes, Daniel's mother. Until today, that might have been my only identifier in this gathering. Daniel's mother, a background character in someone else's story." I paused, letting the words settle. "But as today has reminded all of us, we are each the protagonists of our own lives, with histories and values and dreams that deserve recognition." I looked at Daniel and Alessandra. When I was 22, I became a single mother with no idea how to navigate the path ahead. All I knew was that I would do whatever it took to give my child a good life. Not an easy life, not a life of luxury, but a life grounded in love and possibility. I gestured to the quilt behind them. That quilt represents the journey we took. Together, the setbacks and triumphs, the ordinary days and special moments, the foundation upon which Daniel built his future. I made it because I wanted him to remember that no matter where life takes him, he carries that foundation within him. My voice grew stronger as I continued. Today has been unexpected in many ways, but perhaps the most unexpected gift was the reminder that honesty, even when difficult, even when inconvenient, is the only solid ground upon which to build anything of lasting value. I raised my glass, To Daniel and Alessandra, may your marriage be built on that solid ground. May you have the courage to see each other fully and the wisdom to value substance over appearance. May you remember that the most meaningful lives aren't necessarily the most impressive ones, but the ones lived with integrity and purpose. The room responded with genuine applause. As I sat down, I saw tears in Daniel's eyes and something like respect in Alessandra's. Barbara squeezed my hand under the table. "Well done," she whispered. The evening continued with dancing, cake cutting, and the traditional festivities of a wedding reception. But beneath these familiar rituals ran a current of authenticity that transformed the atmosphere. Guests seemed to relax into more genuine interactions. The divide between Alessandra's world and Daniel's, between old money and new achievement, became less pronounced as people discovered unexpected connections across presumed boundaries. I danced with Daniel during the mother-son dance, surprised. When he requested the DJ play "What a Wonderful World," the song I used to sing to him as a lullaby. As we moved across the floor, he held me close. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said quietly, "for everything." "Don't be sorry," I replied. "Be yourself. The self I raised you to be, kind, honest, grateful for the journey that brought you here." He nodded against my shoulder. "When did you get so wise?" I laughed softly. "Oh, I've always been wise. You just forgot to notice for a while." Later, as the evening was winding down, Alessandra approached me while Daniel was engaged with his college friends. She had changed from her elaborate gown into a simpler dress for dancing and somehow looked younger, more approachable. "Can we talk for a moment?" she asked, gesturing toward the terrace doors. "Somewhere quiet?" We stepped outside into the cool evening air, the sounds of the reception muted behind us. The lake reflected moonlight in rippling patterns, creating a peaceful backdrop for what I suspected might be a difficult conversation. "I want to apologize," Alessandra began. "Not just for today, but for how I've treated you since we met. I was protecting your image of what your life should be," I suggested gently. She nodded, looking genuinely chagrined. "Something like that. I grew up with such specific expectations. The right schools, the right friends, the right appearance. Always. It becomes who you are, or at least who you think you are. And then someone shows up who doesn't fit that carefully constructed picture," I said, understanding. "Yes." She twisted her new wedding ring nervously. "But it's not an excuse. I was cruel. Dismissive. I didn't see you as a real person with your own story. Your own value." I studied her face, seeing past the perfect features to the vulnerability beneath. "Why did you marry Daniel today? After everything that happened, you could have postponed, taken time to reconsider." She looked surprised by the question, then thoughtful. "Because for the first time since I've known him, I saw him completely. Not the polished version he thought I wanted, but the whole person, including where he came from, including you." She met my eyes directly. "And I realized I loved that person more than the one I thought I was marrying." The sincerity in her voice touched me. "That's a good beginning," I said. "I want to learn from you," she continued, the words rushing out as if she'd been holding them back. "Not just about Daniel, but about building something real. You've created this life of meaning and security without compromising who you are, without pretending to be something you're not." She gestured vaguely toward the reception. "Most of what's in there is just performance. Even the success is often smoke and mirrors." I couldn't help but smile at her sudden disillusionment with her privileged world. "Every life has its challenges and truths, Alessandra. Even yours. The key isn't to reject where you came from, but to see it clearly, both its gifts and its limitations." She absorbed this, then asked hesitantly, Do you think you could ever see me as family? As Daniel's wife, but also as someone you might care about? The vulnerability in her question moved me. I think, I said carefully, that family isn't just what we're born into or who we marry. It's a relationship we build day by day, through honesty and effort and forgiveness. I touched her arm lightly. So yes, I think we have a chance at becoming genuine family to each other, if that's what you want. Relief washed across her face. It is, very much. As we stood together in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight on the water, I felt a sense of possibility that had been absent in my earlier interactions with my new daughter-in-law. The future was unwritten, but at least now it would be authored with greater honesty. The next morning, as guests gathered for a farewell brunch on the resort's sunlit terrace, I packed my belongings in preparation for the drive home. The events of the previous day had left me emotionally drained but profoundly at peace, as if something long out of alignment had finally settled into its proper place. A knock at my door revealed Daniel and Alessandra, both looking refreshed despite the late night. "We wanted to see you before the brunch," Daniel explained, "to give you something." They stepped into the room, and Alessandra handed me a small, beautifully wrapped package. "It's not much," she said, "but we wanted you to have it before you left." I unwrapped it carefully to find a framed photograph. Not a professional portrait from the wedding, but a casual shot someone had taken during the reception. It showed the three of us laughing together, entirely unself-conscious, caught in a moment of genuine connection. "Barbara took it," Daniel explained. "She said it captured something important." I studied the image, struck by how natural we looked. Together, three distinct individuals sharing authentic joy. "It's perfect," I said softly. "There's something else," Alessandra added, reaching into her purse. She withdrew an envelope and handed it to me. This was my idea, but Daniel agreed immediately. Inside, I found a certificate for a full detail and restoration of Old Faithful, not to make it sleek or showy, but to preserve its character while ensuring it would continue running smoothly for years to come. "We want to honor what matters to you," Alessandra explained, "not change it into something it's not." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched me deeply. "Thank you," I said. "Both of you." Daniel cleared his throat, looking slightly nervous. "We've been talking, Mom, about the future, about what's next for us." He glanced at Alessandra, who nodded encouragingly. "We're thinking about moving back closer to home. Not immediately, but maybe in a year or so." "Really?" This was unexpected. "What about your positions in Chicago?" "There are opportunities elsewhere," Alessandra said. "And some things matter more than prestigious addresses or corner offices." Daniel nodded. "We're thinking about starting a family before too long, and we want our children to know their grandmother, really know her, not just see her on holidays." The thought of grandchildren, of being present in their lives, of passing on the values and stories that had nearly been erased, filled me with quiet joy. "I'd like that very much," I said. "And," Alessandra added, "we want to learn from you, about investing, about community work, about building something meaningful." She smiled ruefully. "It turns out I have a lot to learn about what really matters." As we walked together to the farewell brunch, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation of the past 24 hours. What had begun as a painful reminder of my son's apparent rejection had evolved into something I could never have anticipated, a reclaiming not just of my place in his life, but of a deeper truth about value and dignity that all of us had needed to remember. After the brunch, as guests departed and the newlyweds prepared to leave for their honeymoon, I found myself standing next to Old Faithful in the parking lot, keys in hand, ready for the journey home. Barbara approached, elegant even in casual clothes, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Quite a wedding," she remarked. Quite a transformation, I replied. You know what I like about you, Eleanor? You didn't set out to teach anyone a lesson. You just refused to be less than who you are. She patted the faded hood of my car affectionately. Sometimes the most powerful statement is simply showing up as yourself, trunk full of truth and all. I laughed, appreciating her insight. Will you be all right with those two? They have a lot of growing to do. Don't we all? She said philosophically. But yes, I think they'll find their way now. They've had a proper awakening. She studied me thoughtfully. And what about you? What's next for Eleanor Hayes? I considered the question, realizing that for the first time in decades, my future felt wide open. Not because my role as Daniel's mother had ended. It had simply evolved into something more balanced, more mutual. I'm not entirely sure, I admitted. But I know it will be authentic. It will be mine. And it will matter. She nodded approvingly. The best kind of journey. As I drove away from the resort, Old Faithful humming contentedly beneath me, I reflected on the contents of the trunk behind me, now empty of its revelations, but somehow still carrying their significance. The quilt remained with Daniel and Alessandra, a tactile reminder of where he came from. The financial portfolio had returned to its usual place in my home office, neither hidden nor flaunted, simply part of the foundation I had built. But what remained in that trunk, what would always remain, was the space for truth. A willingness to carry it quietly until it needed to be revealed. A commitment to value substance over appearance, authenticity over acceptance. The road ahead unfolded before me, bathed in afternoon sunlight. Whatever came next, I would face it as myself. Eleanor Hayes, nurse, mother, investor, quilter, woman of quiet strength and enduring dignity. Not perfect, not flawless, but real. Completely unapologetically real. And in a world so often distracted by appearances, that reality had proven to be the most powerful revelation of all. 6 months after the wedding, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of fresh coffee, reviewing the quarterly statements from my investment properties. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the familiar space that had witnessed so much of my life's journey. The house felt different now, not empty but open, full of possibility rather than memories alone. My phone buzzed with a text message from Daniel. Good news, just got the Atlanta offer. Can we call later to discuss? I smiled, typing back. A quick response. Congratulations. Call anytime after 3. Love you. The Atlanta position represented a significant step in the plan Daniel and Alessandra had begun forming after the wedding. A deliberate move away from the pressure cooker environment of Chicago's financial district toward something more balanced and meaningful. It would bring them just 3 hours from my home, close enough for regular visits, but far enough to maintain their independence. The last 6 months had brought changes none of us could have anticipated when we stood in that resort parking lot. The wedding day's revelations had set in motion a process of reevaluation that touched every aspect of their lives together, from career ambitions to friendship circles to their definition of success itself. For Daniel, it had sparked a return to the values I had instilled in him, not through lectures, but through consistent example. He began questioning the metrics by which he measured his worth, gradually shedding the constant anxiety of status seeking that had characterized his early career. He started volunteering at a weekend financial literacy program for low-income families, using his expertise to help others build security, rather than just accumulating wealth for its own sake. Alessandra's transformation had been perhaps even more profound. The perfectly polished socialite who had once mocked my car was discovering depths within herself that her privileged upbringing had never encouraged her to explore. She had resigned from her position at the luxury marketing firm and was now consulting for nonprofit organizations, helping them communicate their missions more effectively. She called me regularly, sometimes with practical questions about my investments or community work, but often simply to talk about her changing perspective, about the tensions with her parents who didn't understand her new priorities, about her hopes for the family she and Daniel wished to start. Our relationship had evolved into something I could never have imagined during those tense pre-wedding days. A genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared values rather than mere family obligation. We were different women with different histories, but we had found common ground in our commitment to authenticity and purpose. As for me, I had embraced this new chapter with a sense of liberation and expansion. After 30 years of defining myself primarily through motherhood and my nursing career, I was discovering aspects of my identity that had remained dormant or secondary for decades. I had reduced my nursing hours to part-time, focusing exclusively on the community health program that had always been closest to my heart. With my newfound time, I expanded my investment activities. Not to accumulate more wealth, but to channel resources toward projects that aligned with my values: affordable housing initiatives, healthcare accessibility programs, and small business incubators in underserved communities. I had also, to my own surprise, begun teaching. It started with a one-time workshop on personal finance at the local community center, aimed at single parents struggling to build stability. The response had been so enthusiastic that it evolved into a regular series, then expanded to include basic investment principles for people of modest means. I wasn't a polished presenter with formal credentials, just a woman sharing hard-earned wisdom in practical, accessible terms. But perhaps that was precisely what made the classes valuable. They demystified financial concepts that often seemed reserved for the already privileged. Old Faithful had indeed received its promised detailing and mechanical refresh, emerging from the process with the same character but renewed reliability. Like me, it remained essentially unchanged in nature while functioning better than ever. We continued our journeys together, now occasionally venturing farther than before. Weekend trips to the mountains, visits to friends I'd reconnected with, explorations of communities where I was considering new investments. The phone rang, interrupting my financial review. It was Barbara, who had become an unexpected but welcome presence in my life since the wedding. "Eleanor," she greeted me, her voice as crisp as ever. "Are you busy next Wednesday? There's a situation I'd like your perspective on." Barbara's situations had become a regular feature of our friendship, complex family dynamics or community issues where she valued my practical insight. Despite our different backgrounds, we had discovered a shared approach to life's challenges: direct, thoughtful, and fundamentally kind beneath our no-nonsense exteriors. "I should be free afternoon," I replied. "What's happening?" "It's my granddaughter's foundation," she explained. "The younger one, Sophia, not Alessandra. She's trying to establish a scholarship program for first-generation college students, but she's meeting resistance from the board. Too many old men who think charity means galas and architecture, not actual human investment." I laughed. "And you think I might have some insights?" "I think you're exactly what that boardroom needs. Someone who understands both financial realities and human potential." She paused. "Besides, you're the perfect embodiment of why such scholarships matter. Self-made success with community, impact." After we arranged the details, I returned to my financial statements, but my mind wandered to the upcoming board meeting. Just a year ago, I would have declined such an invitation, assuming I didn't belong in such circles. Now, I recognized that my perspective wasn't just valid but valuable precisely because it differed from the typical voices in those rooms. That afternoon, Daniel called as promised, excited about the Atlanta position, but seeking my input on the housing market there and whether to rent initially or purchase a home. We discussed the options with the easy rapport that had characterized our relationship when he was young, and that had finally returned after years of distance. "Alessandra wants to know if you'd be willing to come down once we're settled," he said. "Help us find the right neighborhood. Maybe look at properties together." "I'd love that," I replied, touched by the invitation. Old Faithful and I will make the trip whenever you're ready. He laughed. That car might outlive us all. Some things are built to last, I said, especially when they're cared for properly. There was a comfortable pause, then Daniel said quietly, You know, Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what was really in the trunk that day. Oh? I was surprised by this shift in the conversation. It wasn't just the quilt or the financial portfolio, he said thoughtfully. Those were important, but they were just evidence. Proof of something bigger. What do you mean? The trunk held your truth, he said simply. The reality of who you are, what you've built, what you value. The parts of yourself and of me that I was trying to erase or hide because they didn't fit the image I thought I needed to project. His insight moved me deeply. That's beautifully put, Daniel. I learned from the best, he replied, even when I wasn't paying attention. After our call ended, I sat on my porch swing, watching the afternoon light shift across my modest front yard. Daniel's observation about the contents of the trunk stayed with me, resonating with my own evolving understanding of that pivotal moment at the wedding. What had changed everything wasn't the revelation of hidden wealth or even the emotional impact of the quilt. It was the simple, powerful act of standing in my truth, refusing to be diminished or dismissed, not out of anger or revenge, but from a place of quiet self-respect. The next morning, I visited one of my rental properties where a new family was moving in, a young nurse with 2 children who reminded me powerfully of myself at that age. I had worked with a local housing program to keep the rent affordable while still covering my costs, part of my commitment to creating the kind of opportunity that had once seemed so elusive in my own early years. Ms. Hayes, the young woman said as I handed her the keys, I can't tell you what this means to us, to have a safe place we can actually afford, in a neighborhood with good schools. Her voice caught slightly. I understand completely, I told her, remembering my own struggles. Sometimes all we need is stable ground beneath our feet to build something wonderful. Later that week, I received an unexpected email from Alessandra's father, Charles. Since the wedding, he had made sporadic but genuine efforts to establish a respectful relationship, initially focused on our mutual financial interests, but gradually expanding to include other topics. This message, however, was different from our usual exchanges. Eleanor, I find myself in need of some straightforward advice, if you're willing. Alessandra has shared with me how your guidance has helped her reevaluate her priorities and find more meaningful direction. I confess I've been struggling to understand her recent choices, but I want to support her journey. Could we speak sometime? Soon? Perhaps there are perspectives I've been missing. The note's humility surprised me. This powerful man who had initially dismissed me was now seeking my input on matters of genuine importance. I replied with a simple invitation to call at his convenience, recognizing the courage it must have taken to reach out in this way. When we spoke the following day, Charles was more candid than I had ever heard him. I built my life around certain definitions of success, he admitted. Accumulation, expansion, influence. I assumed Alessandra would follow that path, just with a more modern flair. He sighed. Now she's talking about social impact and authentic purpose, and frankly, I don't know how to relate to her anymore. Maybe you're not meant to relate to her choices, I suggested gently. Maybe you're just meant to relate to her, to who she is beneath those choices. And who is that? He asked, sounding genuinely perplexed. A woman discovering that her life belongs to her, I said. Not to expectations or appearances or even family legacy, just to her. I paused, then added, It's actually a gift, Charles, to see your child become truly themselves, even when that self differs from what you imagined. There was a long silence. You've had to learn this lesson already, haven't you? He finally said. With Daniel? Yes. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. It was painful at times, but ultimately beautiful. Watching him find his way back to his own truth, even after trying so hard to be something else. And you just accepted this transformation? Not always gracefully, I admitted. But I came to understand that my role wasn't to shape his life according to my vision, but to support him in discovering his own. Our conversation continued for nearly an hour, touching on topics far beyond Alessandra's evolving priorities, on the nature of meaningful success, on legacy beyond wealth, on the unexpected isolation that often accompanies achievement. By its end, something had shifted between us. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual recognition of shared humanity beneath our very different exteriors. The following Wednesday, I accompanied Barbara to the foundation board meeting as planned. The boardroom was exactly as I had imagined, wood-paneled, intimidating, filled with men in expensive suits projecting an air of unquestioned authority. They greeted Barbara with deference and me with polite curiosity. Sophia, Alessandra's younger sister, whom I had briefly met at the wedding, presented her scholarship proposal with passionate clarity. She had clearly done her research, outlining both the structural barriers facing first-generation college students and the economic arguments for supporting them. Yet I could see the skepticism in several board members' expressions. Not outright dismissal, but the kind of distanced assessment that often precedes a gentle no. When the chairman asked for questions, a silver-haired man in an impeccable suit spoke first. "While the concept is certainly admirable," he began, "I wonder if our resources might be better allocated to more established forms of contribution, buildings, research endowments, institutions that have demonstrated longevity." Several heads nodded in agreement. Barbara caught my eye across the table and raised an eyebrow slightly, an invitation to speak. "If I may," I said, my voice steady, despite my initial nervousness. "I'd like to offer a perspective from someone who has been on both sides of this equation." The room's attention shifted to me, expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed impatience. "I was once the kind of student this scholarship would support," I continued. "A young woman with potential but limited resources, seeking education as a path to stability and contribution. And now, I'm an investor with a portfolio that includes property, business stakes, and community development initiatives." I outlined briefly how my nursing education had served as the foundation for everything I later built, emphasizing that the return on human investment extends far beyond the individual recipient. "When we invest in buildings, we create spaces," I said. "When we invest in people, we create possibility. And possibility, when nurtured, tends to multiply in ways we can't always predict." I shared specific examples from my community health program, former patients who had gone on to become healthcare workers themselves, creating ripple effects through entire neighborhoods. I explained how my own modest success had enabled me to create housing opportunities, job training programs, and other forms of support that extended far beyond what my individual achievements might suggest. "The young person you help today," I concluded, "may well be sitting on boards like this one decades from now, making decisions that affect countless others. Or they may be working in communities rarely reached by traditional philanthropy, creating change from within. Either way, the return on your investment will be measured not just in dollars or recognition, but in lives transformed and potential realized." When I finished speaking, the room was quiet. The silver-haired man who had initially questioned the proposal studied me with new interest. "You've given us something meaningful to consider, Ms. Hayes," he said finally. "Sometimes we become so focused on tangible, measurable outcomes that we lose sight of the human element at the heart of philanthropy." The board ultimately approved a pilot version of Sophia's scholarship program, with a commitment to review its impact after 2 years. As we left the building, Sophia hugged me impulsively. "Thank you," she said. for helping them see what matters. Barbara linked her arm through mine as we walked to the parking lot. You know, Eleanor, you have a gift for cutting through pretense without creating defensiveness. That's extraordinarily rare. I laughed. I'm just direct. Always have been. It's more than that, she insisted. You help people reconnect with the values they already hold, but have forgotten how to prioritize. She squeezed my arm lightly. Don't underestimate the power of that ability. That evening, I sat on my porch as dusk settled over the neighborhood, reflecting on Barbara's words. Had I always possessed this ability to speak truth in a way others could hear? Perhaps. But for years I had muted it, not out of fear exactly, but from a habit of making myself smaller to accommodate others' expectations. It took my son's wedding, that painful, beautiful collision of worlds, to fully awaken me to my own voice and the unique perspective it carried. Not because I needed external validation, but because I finally recognized that my experiences had value precisely because they differed from the dominant narratives in rooms like that boardroom. The following Sunday, I hosted a small gathering at my home, a tradition I had recently begun with women from my financial literacy classes who wanted to continue supporting each other beyond the formal sessions. They arrived throughout the afternoon, bringing simple dishes to share and stories of their small victories since we had last met. Maria had successfully negotiated her first raise after practicing the techniques we had discussed. Tamika had opened an investment account with her tax refund instead of spending it immediately. Jenny had finally addressed her credit card debt with a structured repayment plan. Each achievement was celebrated, each setback met with practical suggestions and unwavering encouragement. Looking around my living room at these women of various ages and backgrounds, I felt a profound sense of continuity and purpose. Without fully intending to, I had created a circle of mutual support similar to what I had once desperately needed, but never found in my early years as a struggling single mother. You've changed my thinking about what's possible, Jenny told me as the gathering was winding down. Not just with money, but with life. Seeing what you've built, how you carry yourself, it makes me believe I can create something solid too. Her words touched me deeply. You absolutely can, I assured her, and probably things I never even imagined. After everyone had left, I walked through my quiet house, appreciating anew the life I had built, not just the physical space or financial security, but the web of meaningful connections and contributions that had become my true legacy. I thought of Daniel and Alessandra, preparing for their move to Atlanta and the new chapter it represented. Of Barbara and her continuing friendship. Of Charles's unexpected reaching out. Of the young nurse and her children settling into their new home. Of the women who had gathered in my living room, each taking steps toward greater agency in their lives. All of these connections had flowered from that moment of truth in the resort parking lot, when I had opened the trunk of my old car and revealed not just its contents, but the essence of who I was and what I valued. I made myself a cup of tea and settled into my favorite chair, picking up the journal I had recently begun keeping. On its pages, I had started documenting not just events or reflections, but the wisdom I wanted to preserve, for myself, for Daniel and Alessandra, for the grandchildren who might someday sit on my lap and ask about my life's journey. I wrote, "The most powerful thing we possess isn't wealth or status or even talent. It's truth, our unique lived experience and the values we've distilled from it. When we honor that truth instead of hiding it, when we speak it with dignity instead of apology, we create space not just for our own authenticity, but for others as well. Real transformation rarely happens through confrontation or demand. It happens when we simply stand firmly in who we are, refusing to be diminished or erased. That quiet, persistent authenticity can change not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone it touches, sometimes in ways we never live to see. The Contents of the trunk matter less than our willingness to open it, to reveal the substance of our lives without shame or pretense. Because ultimately, that substance, the carefully built foundation beneath the surface, is what endures when appearances fade and pretensions collapse. Remember, your life doesn't need to be impressive to be valuable. It doesn't need to be perfect to be worthy of respect. It simply needs to be authentic, built with integrity, lived with purpose, shared with generosity. The rest will follow in its own time, in its own way. As I closed the journal, I felt a profound sense of peace, not the passive acceptance that comes with resignation, but the active tranquility that arises from alignment with one's deepest values. My journey hadn't been easy or straightforward. It had included struggle, sacrifice, disappointment, and periods of painful disconnection. But it had also included joy, achievement, growth, and profound connection. And perhaps most importantly, it had led me here, to a place of integration where the various aspects of my life no longer competed but complemented each other, creating a whole greater than its parts. The next morning, I woke early, made coffee, and stepped outside to watch the sunrise. The air was crisp with early autumn, the sky gradually shifting from deep blue to painted gold. Old Faithful sat in the driveway, its recently restored paint catching the first light of day. My phone pinged with a message from Daniel. "Just wanted to say I love you, Mom. Thanks for showing me what real success looks like." I smiled, typing, "Back, love you too. Real success is a life that reflects your truest values. You're well on your way." As I sipped my coffee, I thought about the journey ahead. For Daniel and Alessandra, for the women in my financial literacy group, for the young family in my rental property, for all of us searching for meaning and substance in a world often distracted by appearances. The path wouldn't always be clear or easy. There would be setbacks and doubts, moments of forgetting and needing to remember again. But the trunk had been opened. The truth had been revealed. And once revealed, it could never again be completely hidden or denied. That was the real gift I had given my son on his wedding day. Not the quilt with its carefully preserved memories, not the financial portfolio with its steady growth over decades, but the example of a life lived with quiet dignity and authentic purpose, a standard to measure against when the voices of status and appearance grew too loud. As the sun cleared the horizon, casting long shadows across my front yard, I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to the woman I had become, to the son finding his way back to his true self, to the unexpected connections that had flourished, from a moment of simple, powerful truth. And to Old Faithful, my trusty car that had carried not just my physical journey, but the essence of my life's meaning in its modest trunk. Sometimes the most ordinary vessels contain the most extraordinary revelations, if only we have the courage to open them and share what's inside. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.